So there were three friends sitting around, and they were discussing death. And one asked the group, "What would you like people to say about you at your funeral?" Now, being a good guy, he did not just ask this question and leave it out there. He decided to answer it himself. And so his answer was, "I would like for people to say that he was a great humanitarian who really cared about his community." So the second guy kind of nodded, and he looked around and he said, "All right, well, I guess what I would like people to say most about me at my funeral is he was a great husband and father who was a wonderful example to so many people." And finally, it came time for the third guy to answer, and he kind of shook his head at both of the other guys, and he said, yeah, those are all great things. And he said, "But really, really, above all else, what I would love for people to say about me at my funeral is, look, he's moving." So I tell this joke not to demean or to undermine the celebration we are having together today, but because after the week that we have just been through, a week where we think about the last actions and the last breath of Jesus, a week in which we here at CCB have heard a lot of really tough news about members of our church family and members of their families. We not only need a good laugh, but we need to be reminded not of where this story starts, but where the story goes. Just like this joke, the Easter story starts at death and despair, and then continues in awe and sharing and amazement. The one they thought dead wasn't, after all. Now note that I didn't say that the story ends with awe, sharing, and amazement, because this story, my friends, is far from over. You see, in the middle of the Easter story, resurrection is proclaimed, and it's proclaimed simply: He is risen. There are no long, drawn-out details, no long story, unlike the worst lies or most convoluted stories we perhaps have heard in our lifetimes. It is just laid out there as fact. Christ is risen. And then the question comes: so why do you look for the living among the dead? Why do you look for the living among the dead? These are perhaps the most important 10 words in this exchange, and I would contend that they are the ones that should stick with us the most closely as we go back out into a world that is full of sensationalized bad news, and yes, very real bad news too. As I mentioned earlier, it's been a tough week here, certainly in the world, as well as we receive the news about the airport bombing in Brussels and increasing tension in the political realm. And also in our church family, we have heard about members who have lost dear loved ones and were diagnosed with cancer and struggled throughout this week with mental health issues. Emmanuel, God with us, in the form of Jesus Christ, who went to the cross and the tomb, who understands the challenges and the joys of humanity. By the power of the Holy Spirit, he continues to walk beside and work through us along our journeys. So why do you seek the living among the dead? If we believe in this story at all, even one iota, then we believe that we have a living, loving God who is still at work in this world today. There's this great story that I came across this week about a grave in a cemetery in Hanover, Germany. Now, on this grave were placed huge slabs of granite and marble cemented together and fastened with heavy steel clasps. It belongs to a woman who did not believe in the resurrection, and yet strangely she directed in her will that her grave be made so secure that if there were at the end of times an actual resurrection of the dead, that it couldn't reach her, no matter what. So on the marker were inscribed these words: "This burial place must never be opened." But in time, a seed, much like the one that Bryn spoke with the children about, that had been covered over by the stones began to grow. And slowly it pushed its way through the soil and out from beneath all of these stones and the cement and the granite. It was the seed of a tree, and as the trunk enlarged, the great slabs were gradually shifted so that the steel clasps were wrenched from their sockets. A tiny seed had become a tree that had pushed aside those stones. Where do we seek the living? Where do we seek the living God in our lives today? Where do we see life in the midst of the death and difficulty that might otherwise surround and drown us? Is it at work or at school? Is it in a volunteer opportunity that you take up in the confines of your own home or family? Or perhaps here and through the relationships forged in and ministries carried out through this place? You see, in the midst of all the tough news this week brought in our direction, I was amazed to hear many stories of new life. An 18-year-old cancer survivor headed back to graduate with her senior class. An addict who is in recovery and making it work. The celebration of a baby on the way. The circumstances surrounding medical issues that meant people got just the right life-saving treatment at just the right time. The work of those who are bringing groups together to talk about some of the most important issues of inequality in our time. The ones who have found a new community or a new relationship to call home, accepted and welcomed just as they are. The preparations for our very own refugee resettlement ministry, which affords a new and safe life for those who have suffered and struggled more than we may ever know or understand. There was this meme floating around this week for you Facebookers out there that said, Easter is not just a day or an event, it is a mindset. To believe that there is life and abundant life at that in the midst of the mundane and everyday and in the midst of the bad news of this world. That is the mindset of an Easter people. To believe that God is still at work in the world and that death does not have the last word. That is the mindset of an Easter people. To have our eyes and our ears and our hearts attuned and open to the places where new life is being birthed and nurtured every day. That is the mindset of an Easter people. And to be on the lookout for ways to be a part of the birthing and nurturing of new life. That is the mindset of an Easter people. And we, my friends, gathered here today are an Easter people. We sit here and celebrate with one another about 2,000 years since the resurrection, and yet we have a call to keep that resurrection story and the call and mission of Jesus Christ that comes forth from it alive and well even today. Teresa of Avila, mystic and saint, once said these words, which are some of my favorites. She said, "Christ has no body here on earth but yours, no hands but yours, no feet but yours. Yours are the eyes which express Christ's compassion to the world. Yours are the feet with which Christ is to go about doing good, and yours are the hands with which Christ is to bless us now." You may not realize it. I may not realize it. But the truth is that we can all be a part of the ground-breaking, earth-shattering, death-overturning, new life-birthing, future-nurturing work that God is about in the world today. The question is, where will we seek the living, the new life? And how will we take part in it as Christ's hands and feet and heart in our homes, in our community, and in the world? My friends, may we be faithful and curious enough to keep our eyes and our ears and our hearts open to hear the good news of life conquering even death. And may we be brave enough to enter into the story ourselves, to accept the invitation. Christ is risen, so let us seek the living God each and every day. Amen.